Good afternoon. My name is Bill Murphy. I am a volunteer patient advocate here in my state of New Hampshire. My advocating experiences in recent years have been largely consumed by helping those patients suffering in pain, whether it be pain due to chronic illness or pain due to acute situations such as postoperative procedures or injury, for example. My message today is directed toward the New Hampshire delegation in Washington. Those folks being Senator Maggie Hassan, Senator Jeanne Shaheen, Representative Annie Kuster, and Representative Chris Pappas. But more specifically within that, Senator Jeanne Shaheen and Representative Annie Kuster, as they are sponsors of a piece of legislation currently before the Congress, which is referred to as the NOPAIN Act. Now, NOPAIN Act, that would imply that the act focuses on the lessening of a patient's experience relative to pain, when in fact, NOPAIN is simply an acronym for the true title, which is Non-Opioids Prevent Addiction in the Nation Act. So the act is focused on addiction and not the lessening of a patient's experience relative to pain. Let me read a bit directly from the NOPAIN Act, the introduction of the act. This bill would ensure safe, non-addictive therapies are widely available to the tens of millions of Americans who undergo an outpatient surgical procedure every year. This policy change aims to reduce unnecessary exposures to opioids and the likelihood of opioid abuse or addiction following an acute pain incident. Drug-related overdoses and deaths skyrocketed during the pandemic, resulting in the highest rates ever recorded. Congress can act now to prevent addiction before it starts by ensuring those who need non-addictive pain therapies can have access to them. So my first concern is the messaging. The messaging being that the use of opioids for the management of acute pain often results in addiction, which is absolutely not factual. All studies over recent years show the exact opposite, and that is that the use of opioids for the management of acute pain rarely ever results in addiction. My larger concern, however, with the NOPAIN Act is that I believe, should it pass, there would be unintended consequences. And I believe we need look no further than the CDC guidelines of 2016 for opioid prescribing, which it's largely known today that those guidelines had widespread negative impacts on many patient communities. The guidelines were misapplied and were applied to patient communities that were specifically excluded from those guidelines, yet they were told to those patients that they were included in those guidelines. It was not the case. My concern is the NOPAIN Act will be misapplied in a similar fashion. But to get to the two examples of the unintended consequence of the CDC guidelines, opioid prescribing guidelines, which again, I believe the NOPAIN Act will have similar results, to reference a study directly from the National Cancer Institute. Now, again, the CDC opioid prescribing guidelines of 2016 specifically excluded the treatment of cancer pain. Yet from the National Cancer Institute, the study states, people with cancer nearing the end of their life are not getting needed opioids to control their pain. A Dr. Andrea Enzinger of the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute explained, an unintended consequence of these regulations is that it became much harder for people with cancer to access pain medications even at the end of life. Now, end of life was also excluded from the CDC opioid prescribing guidelines, but yet you see here the National Cancer Institute explains these patients are being impacted. The study goes on to quote a Dr. Judith Pace, who is the director of the Cancer Pain Program at Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Medicine. She explains, the regulations that have been implemented to try to counteract the opioid epidemic have made things harder for our cancer patients. She goes on to state, the amazing thing about oncology right now is that we've got extraordinary treatments that are leading to long-term survival for many patients. But pain is often part of the cancer experience, and many patients may live with pain long after treatment is stopped. So this, again, direct from the National Cancer Institute, explaining the misapplication of the CDC opioid prescribing guidelines. In fact, the guidelines were so misapplied that the CDC themselves needed to come out with an updated communications to physicians across the country, explaining to them that the guidelines were being misapplied and that this should stop. Again, my concern is the NOPAIN Act will be misapplied as well. To address the point or the messaging in the NOPAIN Act that the use of opioids for the management of acute pain often results in addiction, I'll state a few studies. First, from the Journal of Pain Research, the title itself, "Today's non-medical opioid users are not yesterday's patients." The study explains that there are exceptions, of course, there are always exceptions, but we should never define policy, regulation, or law to address the exception, because then those policies, regulations, and laws impact the entire community. The study goes on to cite the National Survey on Drug Use and Health. They state that in a 2007 study, so this data is aged, but it is accurate, and in today's numbers, they are magnified over this study. But in 2007, a study of more than 27,000 OxyContin addicts who entered rehab between the years 2001 and 2004 found that 78% said the drug was never prescribed for them for any medical reason, and that 78% had a history of prior treatment for a substance abuse disorder. So therein lies the truth behind the origins of addiction. It really is the cause of the substance. It really is the substance the cause. It is other factors that are the cause. And all you need to do is speak to any addiction community where they are in recovery. They often will speak the truth about this. You will get the truth from them. This study goes on to state that reducing prescriptions has not reduced opioid-related deaths. To the contrary, it seems to be driving up the death toll by pushing non-medical users toward deadlier drugs. A more rational approach based on a more accurate narrative would emphasize measures aimed at reducing the harms associated with the consumption of black market opioids. That point makes the case that the drugs causing deaths today are not prescribed opioids for patients. It is illicitly manufactured fentanyl, which is being manufactured in China and Mexico and then smuggled into the country. That is the drug driving the largest percentage of drug overdose deaths today in the country, along with polysubstance abuse. So not prescription opioid use by legitimate patients. It's just not the case. I'll go on to cite studies done by the New England Journal of Medicine and SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. They released studies showing that less than 1% of those prescribed opioids for the purpose of managing chronic pain became addicted. Likewise, and more specifically for the NOPAIN Act, likewise, the study below explains that prescription opioid use to manage acute pain almost never results in addiction. Now, the direct quote from the study. Researchers note that despite a documented doubling of opioid analgesic use from 2000 to 2010, which, by the way, has been greatly reduced, we are at a point now where prescriptions for opioids are at a 10-year low, whereas drug overdose deaths are at an all-time high. So the dynamic between those two factors explains it all. But to go on with the study, opioid use disorder develops in only a small percentage of adults who are prescribed opioids for acute pain. In a large study of 640,000 opioid-naive patients in which prescription opioid use was examined 1 year after surgery for 11 surgical conditions, the prevalence was found to range from 0.12% for cesarean section deliveries to 1.4% for total knee replacement surgeries. In another study in which prescription opioid use was examined in approximately 18 million people with acute pain who had not undergone surgery, and had never taken opioids prior, only 1.4% of those who were prescribed opioids were found to still use this medication a year later. So these points are made by the Journal of Pain Research, the New England Journal of Medicine, and the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, all making the case that the use of opioids for the management of acute pain rarely ever results in addiction. It is a non-issue, yet the NOPAIN Act is focused on addressing that non-issue. My concern is twofold. First, the NOPAIN Act, it's an opioid-sparing piece of legislation. It promotes the use of non-opioid therapies rather than the use of opioids themselves. My larger concern is that it will be misapplied, just as the CDC guidelines were misapplied. I believe that doctors will use this act to push non-opioid therapies on patients. I believe they will go to the same extent they did when citing the CDC guidelines and state that the NOPAIN Act is law and prevents them from using opioids for the treatment of acute pain, which would not be the case, but would again demonstrate misapplication of the NOPAIN Act. Secondarily, the NOPAIN Act again is focusing on a non-issue. The use of opioids for management of acute pain rarely ever results in addiction. You need look at the studies that I cited or any other study in recent years. It will make the same case. So I would ask the New Hampshire delegation in Washington, Senators Maggie Hassan, Senator Jeanne Shaheen, Representative Annie Custer, Representative Chris Pappas, please look beyond your current sources for data relative to this subject. You're being misinformed. You're being given bad information. And you're putting forth legislation that will result in wasted energy and wasted funding should it pass. We really need to look at more recent studies. I would beg you to please open up your minds to these studies. They show the more factual data. Please take a look at them. I would make myself available to speak with your office at any time. Please reach out to me. I'm very willing to speak with you relative to these details. Please take this into consideration. Thank you.